The envelope was still sitting on the kitchen counter when I heard her laugh. Not a soft laugh. A bold one. The kind that fills a room and expects the room to make space for it. And the kitchen, my kitchen, with its worn oak cabinets and the small chip in the countertop from the time I dropped a cast iron skillet the year we moved in, that kitchen went very quiet around that sound. The envelope had my name on it. Loretta May Simmons. My full name, printed in the careful hand of Mr. Gerald Okafor, the family attorney who had handled my grandmother's affairs for 30 years. He had pressed it into my palm 2 weeks before at her graveside, and he had looked at me the way old men look at young women when they know something the young woman is about to need. "Don't open this until you're ready," he'd said. "And Loretta, you'll know when that is." I had not been ready. Until tonight. The laugh came again from upstairs. Then footsteps. Then Marcus's voice, low and warm in a way I had not heard him speak to me in 2.5 years. I set the envelope down very carefully on the counter, right next to the crack in the laminate, and I listened to the sound of my marriage falling through the floor. This is the story of what I found inside that envelope. And what it cost everyone who thought they already knew my worth. I had met Marcus Devon Simmons at a fundraiser dinner for a community arts program. I was on the organizing committee. He was charming and tall and laughed easily at things I said, which was rarer than people think. We married 14 months later in a ceremony at my grandmother Nana Bea's farm outside Macon, Georgia. The whole yard smelled of gardenias and someone's sweet potato pie cooling on a windowsill, and I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be full. Not just happy. Full. Nana B, Beatrice Lorraine Cole, had built that farm herself. Or rather, she had taken what her mother left her and she had refused to let it diminish. 42 acres that she worked, that she leased portions of, that she paid taxes on every single year through lean seasons and hard ones, through years when the money sat flat and years when it grew slow and steady the way real things grow. She was not a woman who announced herself. She pressed her hands into the dirt and let the land speak for her. I grew up spending summers there. I learned to can tomatoes and keep ledgers and never sign anything I hadn't read twice. Those were her lessons. She delivered them the way she delivered most things, without ceremony, over a meal, while doing something else entirely. Marcus never quite understood Nana B. He was polite to her in the way people are polite to things they don't respect. He called her the old bird when he thought I couldn't hear. He once suggested, over dinner, that maybe she should think about liquidating some of the property at her age, and Nana B had set down her fork with the patience of a woman who has outlasted every opinion ever offered to her, and she had said, simply, "I'll think about a lot of things, Marcus." And she had picked up her fork and finished her meal. She died on a Tuesday in March. 81 years old, in her own bed, in her own house, on her own land. The way she had intended. I was devastated. The kind of devastated that sits behind your eyes and presses outward all day, that makes ordinary things, a glass of water, the sound of a car door, a particular quality of afternoon light, feel suddenly unbearable. Marcus attended the funeral. He wore a good suit. He held my hand during the service and then spent the reception talking to people he'd just met about a real estate development project he was excited about. And I stood by the dessert table alone and tried to remember the last time he had looked at me the way he used to. The house, our house, in Atlanta, the one we'd bought together 8 years ago, had been in my name from the beginning. This was not dramatic or strategic at the time. Marcus had a business debt he was clearing, something about a partnership that had dissolved badly, and a mortgage lender who needed a single clean credit file on the application. So the house went into my name alone. Loretta May Simmons. We hadn't thought much of it. I signed. We moved in. He had forgotten. I don't think Marcus forgot maliciously. I think he forgot the way people forget things that don't feel important to them anymore, gradually, and without guilt, the way water recedes from a bank. Danielle had been in the picture for, I later learned, about 8 months before she arrived in my house. She was 31 to my 43. She wore very good perfume and had a way of tilting her head when she spoke that made people feel they'd said something interesting. She was, by all visible measures, the exact opposite of me, loud where I was quiet, impulsive where I was methodical, and utterly, completely sure of herself in every room she entered. Marcus brought her home on a Thursday. He told me, standing in the living room with his keys still in his hand, that he needed space to figure things out. That he and Danielle had something real. That he hoped I could be mature about this. He used the word evolved, which I have thought about many times since, and each time it makes me want to sit down. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I stood in my living room, on my hardwood floors, in my house, and I listened to my husband explain how generous he was being by telling me this directly instead of letting me find out another way. And when he was done, I said, "I'll need some time to think." And he nodded, as if I had said something reasonable and small. Danielle moved in that weekend. She rearranged the kitchen. She moved the spice rack, the handmade one my cousin Terence had built for me, off the wall and replaced it with something from a home goods catalog. She put new throw pillows on my couch. She left her moisturizer on my bathroom counter. She walked through my rooms with the easy confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. And Marcus let her. More than let her. He smiled at the new throw pillows. He commented on how much brighter the living room felt. He poured wine at my kitchen table for both of them and watched her settle into the shape of a life I had built, and I believe, in his heart, he thought I would simply dissolve. I stayed in the guest room. That also, I think, confused him. He had expected me to leave. When I didn't, he told me I was being difficult. When I still didn't, he had his lawyer send me a letter about opening formal separation proceedings and the disposition of shared assets. Shared assets. The night that letter arrived, I went downstairs at 2 in the morning and I made a cup of chamomile tea and I stood in the kitchen and I looked at the envelope from Gerald Okafor. Still sealed. Still sitting by the crack in the counter. I had moved it twice without opening it. I had picked it up and set it back down like a thing too hot to hold. I thought about Nana B. About the way she used to sit at her own kitchen table in the early morning before anyone else was up, with her coffee and her ledger books, working through numbers with a stub pencil. Quiet. Sure. Not performing certainty, actually possessing it. "You'll know when," she had said. From upstairs, Danielle's laugh again. Bright and careless as a stone thrown through glass. I picked up the envelope. The seal broke cleanly, the way old wax does when it's ready. Inside were 2 documents, folded together. The first was a letter in Nana B's handwriting, real handwriting, not print, the kind with pressure behind it, the kind that meant she had sat down specifically to say this. The second was a legal document I had to read 3 times before I understood what I was holding. The letter first. "Loretta," she had written. "I have watched you be quiet your whole life. Quiet is not the same as weak, but I want to make sure you have the tools to know the difference. What I'm giving you, I'm giving to you alone. Not to a marriage, not to a man's ambitions. To you. To the part of you that stands in the dirt and doesn't flinch. Use it to build something that cannot be taken. Use it to remember who named you, and why. My grandmother's full name was Beatrice Lorraine Cole, and she had a maiden name before she became Cole, and that maiden name was Marsh. The Marsh family had owned a series of commercial properties in downtown Macon for 3 generations. Most of those properties had been sold off through the decades, through necessity and inheritance disputes and the kind of attrition that strips black families of wealth so quietly that by the time anyone notices, there's nothing left to point to. But not all of them. The legal document was a property deed. 3 commercial parcels in Macon, 1 on Cotton Avenue, 2 on Hazel Street, held in a trust that Nana B had restructured in the final year of her life. The trust had a single beneficiary. Loretta Mae Simmons. I stood there in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, in the house that was already mine, holding proof that 3 other properties were mine as well. Properties that a conservative estimate, per the letter, which referenced a recent independent appraisal Nana B had quietly commissioned, placed at a combined value of just over $1.4 million. Nana B had known. She had watched Marcus and she had built a wall, brick by brick, with her name and then mine, and she had never said a single word about it. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs made that decision before I did. The tile was cold through my robe. I held the deed in both hands and I thought, she saw this coming. She didn't warn me. She armed me instead. I did not go back to sleep that night. The next morning, before Marcus and Danielle came downstairs, I was already dressed and out the door. I drove to Gerald Okafor's office, which opened at 8:30, and he was already there, as if he had been waiting, which maybe he had been. He rose when I came in and looked at my face and said, "You opened it." And I said, "I need to understand everything." He poured 2 cups of coffee and we sat for 2 hours while he explained it to me in complete detail. The trust had been established 4 years ago. The Macon properties were income generating. 2 of the 3 had long-term commercial tenants whose leases transferred to me as the new trustee and beneficiary. I had been receiving, unknowingly, a small quarterly distribution that Nana B had directed into an account in my name at a bank in Macon, an account that had accumulated, over 4 years, just over $60,000. Gerald had the account statements in a folder. He slid them across the desk. I had a bank account in Macon I had never touched. I had never known it existed. Because Nana B had not wanted anyone to know it existed. Not until it was necessary. Gerald also said something I needed to hear. He said, "Your grandmother wanted me to tell you, when you came in, she was not building you a way out. She was building you a place to stand." I drove home slowly. The morning light was coming in from the east, sharp and early, and the city was doing that thing it does in spring where everything looks briefly clean. I thought about what a place to stand meant, practically. I thought about Marcus's lawyer's letter and the phrase shared assets and the assumption inside it, the assumption that what was mine was negotiable because he had lived inside it long enough to believe it was his. I called my own lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Carla Winston, and she was a woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and did not waste words. I explained the situation. I told her about the house deed and the Macon trust. I heard her set down something on her desk. "The house is solely in your name?" "Since day one." A pause. "And he moved her in?" "This past Sunday." Another pause. "Loretta?" "Yes." "He has no legal claim to that house." "I know." "And the Macon properties, those are entirely separate, held in the trust predating the marriage?" "Yes." "Okay." The sound of her picking up a pen. "Let me make some calls." What followed were 3 weeks I will not rush through, because the truth is they were 3 weeks of extraordinary silence. On the outside, nothing had changed. Marcus went to work. Danielle rearranged more of my things. She replaced the small framed print in the hallway, a photograph of Nana B's farm at dawn that my cousin had taken and given to me as a housewarming gift, with something abstract from an art market. She set Nana B's photograph on the floor behind the guest room door. I found it there on a Tuesday evening. I picked it up and looked at it for a long time. The farm at dawn, the light coming through the pecan trees, and if you knew where to look, if you had spent your summers there and learned its particular geometry, you could see in the far corner of the frame the edge of the house where Nana B had her kitchen table. Where she sat with her ledger. Where she pressed a stub pencil into numbers and made them mean something. I carried the photograph back to my room and set it on my dresser where I could see it every morning. During those 3 weeks, I also drove to Macon twice. I met the tenants on Hazel Street, a dry cleaning business that had been there 11 years, a dentist's office that had been there 7. Both leases were solid, both tenants steady. The Cotton Avenue parcel was a corner lot with a building that needed some work but sat on land that the surrounding blocks were slowly making more valuable every year. A developer had, Gerald told me, already inquired twice. Nana B had declined both times. I stood on that corner in Macon on a warm April afternoon and I looked at the building with its old brick and its painted signage, faded but still legible, Cole and Marsh Family Properties, established 1958, and I thought about my great-grandmother, whose hands I never shook, whose face I only knew from one photograph, who had looked at this corner and decided, this stays. 4 generations of women who had decided, this stays. Marcus served me with formal separation papers on a Friday. His lawyer had helpfully included a list of proposed asset divisions that assumed the Atlanta house was marital property and subject to equitable distribution under Georgia law. It was a thorough document. It made a great many assumptions. Carla filed our response on a Monday. The response included a certified copy of the original deed to the Atlanta house, Loretta Mae Simmons, sole owner, purchased 8 years prior, and a formal notice that no marital interest in the property had ever been established because no co-ownership had ever existed. It also included a notice to vacate addressed to Marcus and to Danielle, who had no legal standing in the property whatsoever, giving them 30 days as required by Georgia law. I was not in the room when Marcus received it. But Carla told me later that his attorney called within 40 minutes of delivery. That the call lasted 9 minutes. That his attorney's voice, which was a voice Carla knew well from previous negotiations, had a particular quality of carefully managed shock. Marcus came home that evening and stood in the kitchen doorway. I was cooking, a real meal, the first I'd made in weeks, because something had loosened in my chest and I wanted to fill the house with the smell of something that was mine. I was making my grandmother's smothered chicken, the recipe she had written on a note card in that same careful handwriting and tucked into my hope chest when I got married. Marcus stood in the doorway and I could feel him looking at the back of my neck, at the way I moved around the stove the way I always had, easy and unhurried, as if nothing in the room had shifted. But everything had. Loretta. His voice had lost the warmth it had been saving for someone else. I didn't turn around. The papers are on the table. I heard him pick them up. I heard the sound of pages turning. I added the time to the pan and let the smell rise up slow and deep, the way Nana B had taught me. Patience is an ingredient too, she used to say. This is our house. His voice was tighter now. A wire pulled too hard. My name is on the deed, Marcus. My name alone. You knew that. You just stopped thinking it mattered. He said something then about how 8 years of marriage meant something, about equity and contribution and the time he had spent on renovations. He mentioned the deck he had built out back. His voice climbed in a way I had not heard before, not anger, exactly. The sound of a man discovering the floor he was standing on was not where he believed it to be. I turned then. I looked at him across the kitchen, my counter with the small chip in the laminate, my handmade spice rack that I had already put back on the wall because I had taken it down from the hallway floor and rehung it the morning after I opened the envelope. You have 30 days, I said. Both of you. Danielle appeared behind him in the doorway. The boldness in her face, that head-tilting, room-filling certainty, had changed shape. She looked at me, and then she looked at Marcus, and the calculation running behind her eyes was fast and visible as a hand of cards turned face up. She left in 12 days. She did not say goodbye to me. She did not need to. Marcus lasted 23 of his 30 days. He took the things that were his and left the things that were mine, and in the end the list of what was actually his was shorter than he had imagined. The deck he built in the backyard stayed. A deck cannot walk out the door. And frankly, it was a good deck. My cousin Terence repainted it that summer and we ate dinner out there on a Saturday evening in July, the two of us and Gerald Okafor and Carla Winston, and we had sweet tea and my grandmother's recipe and the kind of conversation that settles into your bones and stays. Carla raised her glass at one point and looked at me. She built you a place to stand. It was the second time I'd heard those words and they hit different in July, outside on the deck, with the Georgia evening going gold and slow around us. I raised my glass back. The Macon properties are under active management now. I hired a local property manager, a woman named Sandra Tate who grew up 3 streets from Nana B's farm and who handles the leases with a precision that would have made my grandmother nod with quiet approval. The Cotton Avenue building is undergoing renovation. I have not decided yet whether to lease it or to do something with it myself, something with the family name on it. Cole and Marsh. The sign is already there, after all. faded but legible. A thing that has already survived more than I can count. I still live in the Atlanta house. I repainted the hallway a warm terracotta that I'd been thinking about for years, but Marcus had called too bold, too much. My cousin Terrence built me 2 new shelves for the kitchen, and the spice rack is back on the wall where it belongs, and some mornings I stand in the kitchen with my coffee the way I imagine Nana B stood in hers, and I look at the counter with the small chip in the laminate, and I think about everything that has happened in this room. The envelope is still here. I kept it. I keep it in the drawer by the stove, the one where I keep the recipe note cards, because that felt right, a drawer of things handed down, things written in careful hands by women who wanted to make sure something survived them. The law, the deed, the trust, none of those are what saved me. I want to be careful and honest about that. The paperwork gave me standing. What saved me was quieter and older than any legal document. It was the practice of knowing what is yours. Knowing the difference between what someone lives inside and what someone owns. Knowing that a man who forgets your name on a deed has forgotten something much more fundamental than a legal detail. Nana B knew Marcus would forget. Not because she was cynical, she was not a cynical woman. Because she was clear-eyed. She had watched men forget her own mother's name on things that mattered. She had spent her life building structures that did not require anyone else to remember. And when she felt her time running short, she made sure I had a structure too. The last thing she wrote in that letter, the final line, below her signature, was this: "The dirt knows your name, baby." It always has. I have thought about that line more times than